My father left when my mother got sick. Years later, he got sick too. And when he called me for help, I hung up. That sentence alone makes people decide who I am. I know that. Some of you already closed the door on me in your head. Others leaned in. I'm glad you're here, because the truth of what happened isn't loud, and it isn't simple. It's quiet. It's documented. And it followed me for more than a decade before it circled back to him. The call came on a Tuesday. 2:17 p.m. unknown number, but the area code was familiar. The same one he'd had since I was a kid. I stared at my phone long enough for it to stop ringing. Then it rang again. Same number. I answered the second time because something in my body already knew. He said my name like he hadn't practiced it. Then he said, "It's your dad." I didn't respond right away. I waited. There are moments where silence tells you more than words ever could. His breathing was uneven. Not crying yet. Working up to it. "I'm sick," he said. Then quieter, "I need help." That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he said next. "Your mom would have wanted you to answer." I said calmly, "You have the wrong number." And I ended the call. I want to be very clear about something before I take you back. I didn't do that out of anger. I didn't do it to punish him. I did it because of a decision he made years earlier. A decision that came with paperwork, dates, signatures, and consequences that never expired. I didn't understand it all at the time. I was 21. Still in college. Working 2 jobs. Driving home every weekend because my mother couldn't be left alone for long stretches anymore. But even then, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. When my mother needed him most, he said, "I can't handle this." Those were his exact words. I remember because my mom wrote them down on the back of a CVS receipt the night he packed his suitcase. She didn't cry when he said it. She just nodded and asked if he wanted the blue duffel or the black one. That moment split our lives in half, the before and the after. Before, 2 parents. A mortgage. Sunday dinners that started late and ended with leftovers packed in foil. My dad complaining about traffic. My mom pretending she wasn't tired. After, medical bills. Pill organizers labeled by day. A calendar on the fridge filled with appointment times written in red marker. And me learning how to translate insurance letters I didn't fully understand yet. People love to say, family doesn't do this. They say it like it's a law of nature. But families do exactly what they're allowed to get away with. The illness wasn't sudden. That matters. It wasn't an accident or a single bad diagnosis. It was progressive. Documented. Months of tests before a name was finally given to it. Months where my father still slept in the same bed and still drank coffee at the same kitchen table, right up until the moment the future became inconvenient. When he left, he didn't disappear. He just recalculated. Moved into an apartment 30 minutes away. Changed his mailing address. Opened a new checking account. Said we'd figure things out later. Later never came. And that's where the story people think they know ends. But that's not where mine begins. Because the call I hung up on wasn't the first message he sent. It was just the first one he sent when he had no other options left. What I found afterward, the emails, the dates, the pattern, changed the way I understand responsibility forever. And it started with one message I wasn't supposed to see. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing the truths I've carried for years. Before everything fell apart, our life looked ordinary in a way that felt permanent. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. Tree-lined streets. Lawns that all looked the same by August. Our house was a beige 2-story built in the late 90s. Nothing fancy, but solid. 30-year mortgage. Fixed rate. My parents bought it in 2001 for $189,000. I know the number because I've seen the paperwork more times than I can count. My dad worked in regional sales for a medical equipment company. He traveled 2 or 3 days a week, mostly within driving distance. My mom worked part-time as a library assistant before she got sick. She loved routines. She loved knowing where things belonged. The mail went in a wooden tray by the door. Bills were opened on Fridays. Coupons were clipped on Sundays. I was the only child. Independent. Responsible. The kind of kid teachers described as mature for her age, which usually means you don't cause problems and you clean up messes quietly. By the time I was in college, I came home almost every weekend. Not because I had to, but because it felt normal. When my mom started feeling unwell, it wasn't dramatic. Fatigue, joint pain, brain fog, she joked about at first. She kept a small notebook in her purse where she wrote symptoms and dates. March 12th, April 3rd, April 27th. When doctors didn't have answers, she stayed polite. When tests came back inconclusive, she nodded and scheduled the next appointment. My dad went with her in the beginning. Sat in the plastic chairs. Asked questions. Took notes on his phone. If you had asked me then, I would have said he was handling it fine. He brought home dinner on nights she couldn't cook. He learned which pharmacy had shorter lines. From the outside, it looked like teamwork. That's the version people remember. What they don't see is the shift that happens quietly. The way patience thins when problems stop being temporary. The way tone changes before words do. My dad started traveling more. Volunteering for extra routes. It's good money, he said. We need the insurance. I believed him. I think my mom did too. By the time the diagnosis came, almost a year later, I was home for spring break. I sat in the exam room with them when the specialist finally said the name of the condition out loud. It was chronic, progressive, manageable, but not reversible. The doctor explained treatment options, percentages, side effects. My mom asked practical questions. My dad stared at the floor. On the drive home, no one spoke. Life didn't explode that day. That's important. It narrowed. The house got quieter. Appointments replaced plans. My mom stopped driving long distances. I took over grocery runs. My dad started eating dinner later, sometimes alone. He began using phrases I hadn't heard before. I'm just overwhelmed. This isn't what I signed up for. They sounded harmless. Reasonable, even. I graduated the following year and stayed local for work so I could help more. I moved back home officially, paid my share of utilities, took on more responsibility without anyone asking me to. I thought that's what families did. My dad started sleeping on the couch because the bed hurt his back. He stopped attending appointments. When medical bills came in, he set them aside unopened. We'll deal with it later, he said. One night, while clearing the kitchen table, I noticed an envelope addressed only to him. New bank logo. Different from the joint account they'd used my entire life. I didn't open it. I didn't even mention it. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. I didn't understand it then, but that envelope didn't belong in our house. The moment everything shifted wasn't loud. There was no shouting, no dramatic announcement. It happened on a Thursday evening in October, the kind of night that feels forgettable until it isn't. I had just come home from work. 6:42 p.m. I remember because I checked the microwave clock while reheating leftovers. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table with her pill organizer open in front of her, the Thursday slot already empty. She looked smaller than she had a year earlier. Not frail, just reduced, like something essential had been quietly removed. My dad wasn't home yet. That wasn't unusual on its own. What was unusual was the text message my mom showed me without saying a word. It was from him. Sent at 5:11 p.m. Running late. Don't wait up. No explanation. No apology. Just that. Again, that wasn't enough to mean anything by itself. But patterns don't announce themselves. They accumulate. When he finally came home around 9:30, he smelled like takeout and unfamiliar cologne. He didn't mention dinner. He didn't ask how my mom felt. He went straight upstairs, shut the bedroom door, and didn't come back down. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, I stayed up finishing laundry. I heard him on the phone in the hallway. His voice was low, controlled. He laughed once. Not a big laugh, the kind you use when you don't want to be overheard. I wasn't trying to listen. I didn't need to. The walls in that house carried sound easily. I just can't do this anymore, he said. Then, after a pause, no, I haven't told her. That was the first time something inside me tightened. The next week, he missed another appointment. Then another. He stopped refilling prescriptions unless my mom reminded him twice. When she asked him to pick up a mobility aid the physical therapist had recommended, he sighed like she'd asked for something unreasonable. "We'll see," he said. That phrase became his default. The real crack came on a Sunday afternoon. I was sorting mail when I noticed a return address I didn't recognize. Same unfamiliar bank logo as before. This time there were 2 envelopes. One looked thicker. Official. I didn't open them. I stacked them neatly by his keys. He saw them later and froze. Just for half a second. But I saw it. "Did you go through my mail?" he asked. "No," I said. Truthfully. He nodded, relieved too quickly. Took the envelopes and slid them into his jacket pocket instead of opening them. That night, my mom asked him directly if everything was okay. Her voice was calm. Careful. She always chose her words like she was trying not to scare something away. He didn't look at her when he answered. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," he said. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She asked him what this meant. He stood up from the table and said the sentence that would replay in my head for years. "I can't handle this." There it was. Clean. Simple. Final. The next morning, his side of the closet was half empty. The blue duffel bag was gone. The black one stayed behind, folded, like a decision already made weeks earlier. He left a note on the counter. 3 lines. No date. "I need space. I'll call soon. I'm sorry." He didn't call soon. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. When he finally did reach out, it wasn't to ask about my mom. It was to ask if I could scan and email him copies of certain documents, insurance cards, tax returns, the mortgage statement. "It's just paperwork," he said. That was the moment something stopped feeling like confusion and started feeling like preparation. I didn't understand it then, but he wasn't leaving emotionally. He was leaving strategically. I didn't go looking for the truth all at once. That's not how it happens. It comes in pieces, usually when you're already exhausted and least prepared to absorb more. The first piece arrived in my email inbox on November 18th at 7:06 a.m. It was an automated notification from our health insurance provider. Subject line, "Coverage Update Confirmation." I almost deleted it, assuming it was another generic notice. It wasn't. The email said the primary policyholder had made changes effective December 1st. Dependents listed, 1. Not 2. My mother's name was missing. I read it 3 times. Then I logged into the portal. Username saved. Password unchanged. The dashboard loaded slowly, like it was giving me time to reconsider. Plan status, active covered individual, my father's name, dependents, none. I checked the timestamp. The change request had been submitted 10 days earlier, 2 days after he left the house. I didn't say anything to my mom that morning. I made her oatmeal. I reminded her about her appointment. I drove her to the clinic like everything was normal. In the waiting room, while she was inside with the doctor, I called the insurance company. I gave them my name, my relationship, our address. They confirmed everything politely, efficiently, like it was routine. "Your father requested removal of dependent coverage," the representative said. "Was there a reason listed?" I asked. "No reason is required." That was the moment my hands started shaking. Not dramatically. Just enough that I had to put my phone down. That wasn't the worst part. The next piece came 2 days later, buried in a stack of forwarded mail. A mortgage statement addressed to my father, new mailing address. Same loan, same house. But the payment method had changed. I compared it to the previous month's statement. Same amount, $1,246.32. But the account number at the bottom was different. I logged into the joint bank account. The balance was lower than expected. Not empty, just carefully reduced. There were transfers labeled internal adjustment on dates that lined up with his move. $3,000 on October 4th. $2,500 on October 11th. $1,800 on October 19th. Total, $7,300. He hadn't drained the account. He'd siphoned it. When I confronted him over the phone, calmly, directly, he didn't deny it. "I needed a cushion," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For starting over." That phrase stayed with me. Starting over. as if the life he was leaving behind was a completed project, neatly closed. The documents kept coming. A letter from his employer confirming a change in benefits enrollment. A new lease agreement forwarded accidentally instead of to his new address. 1 bedroom, 12-month term, signed in September. September. He had signed it before my mom's diagnosis appointment. Before the conversation. Before the note on the counter. Then came the email I wasn't supposed to see. It arrived because he forwarded it to the wrong address, my old college email, still linked to our family plan. It was from a financial advisor. Subject line, post-separation planning. Attached were spreadsheets. Projected expenses. Insurance alternatives. A column labeled support, optional, with zeros all the way down. I printed everything. Dates. Amounts. Screenshots. I labeled a folder on my laptop. Timeline. I didn't cry while I did it. I felt methodical. Focused. Like if I stayed organized, I could keep my mother safe from what was unraveling. When I finally told her about the insurance, she listened without interrupting. She asked one question. So he decided before I even knew? I nodded. She closed her eyes and said quietly, I thought I was married. That sentence broke something in me that didn't make noise when it cracked. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. Bills. Notices. Statements. Evidence of a life being dismantled on purpose. I realized then that this wasn't abandonment born of fear. It was abandonment executed with planning. And once I saw that, I knew something else with absolute certainty. He wasn't done protecting himself yet. I stopped reacting after that. Not because it hurt less, but because reacting was expensive. Emotionally. Logistically. I couldn't afford to spend energy on outrage when there were appointments to manage and bills that didn't care how I felt. Control didn't arrive as confidence. It arrived as structure. The first thing I did was make a list. Not of feelings, of facts. Dates. Amounts. Policy numbers. I created a shared spreadsheet and backed it up to 2 separate drives. One physical. One cloud. I titled it plainly, Household Continuity. Every column served a purpose. Utilities. Insurance. Medical expenses. Mortgage. I highlighted anything with his name attached in yellow. There was more yellow than I expected. Then I scheduled calls. Not confrontations, calls. I spoke to a social worker at the clinic. I spoke to a legal aid office that specialized in family abandonment cases. I spoke to the mortgage servicer. I learned which questions to ask and which answers meant nothing. Spousal responsibility varies by state, one attorney told me. Documentation matters, another said. Timing is everything. I didn't tell my father what I was doing. I didn't warn him. I didn't need to. Silence gave me room to think. My mom noticed the shift in me before I did. She asked once if I was okay. I told her I was busy. That wasn't a lie. I was busy building a floor under us. I updated her resume for disability support. I gathered medical records going back 3 years. I requested certified copies. I paid the fees myself, $18 here, $24 there, and logged every expense. At night, when the house was quiet, I reviewed the timeline again. The lease date in September. The insurance change in early November. The account transfers in October. None of it overlapped by accident. That's when the emotional part crept in. Not anger. Recognition. He had run the numbers before he left. I remembered moments differently. The way he'd insisted on being added as the primary policyholder years earlier. The sudden interest in separating finances for convenience. The way he'd pushed for electronic statements only. It's just easier, he'd said. I saw the preparation hiding inside ordinary decisions. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing how calm he sounded every time we spoke after he left. Like he'd already grieved and moved on. Like we were behind schedule. When he called asking for copies of medical bills, for my records, I told him I'd send them later. I never did. I wasn't obligated to help him minimize responsibility. I learned restraint. I learned that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly and waits for the right moment to stand up. By January, I had filed the necessary paperwork to designate myself as my mom's healthcare proxy. I updated emergency contacts. I rerouted important mail. I changed passwords on accounts he no longer needed access to. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Then the call came. Not from him, from his employer's HR department. They wanted clarification on dependent eligibility. They'd noticed conflicting information between prior submissions and recent claims. They asked if my mother was still his spouse. I answered honestly. Yes, I said. Legally. There was a pause. Thank you, the representative said. That helps. I didn't follow up. I didn't push. I let the system do what systems do when they're given accurate information. When my father called later that week, his tone was different. Tighter. He asked if I'd spoken to anyone. No, I said. That's not what I heard, he replied. I waited. He exhaled sharply. You didn't have to make this complicated. I thought about everything I'd seen. The spreadsheets. The zeros. The planning. I didn't, I said. You did. That was the first time he went quiet. And in that silence, I knew something irreversible had already been set in motion. Everything happened faster after that. Not emotionally, procedurally. Systems move quickly once the right information reaches the right place. On February 3rd at 9:14 a.m., my father sent me a text. Did you talk to HR? I didn't answer. At 11:02 a.m., he called. I let it ring. At 11:07, he called again. This time I picked up. You blindsided me, he said. No greeting. No question. I answered a question honestly, I replied. You know what this does to me. I stayed quiet. He kept talking. They're saying I owe back premiums, he said. They're reviewing the coverage gap. I pictured the timeline. The insurance removal. The dependent reclassification. The months he'd quietly insured only himself while my mother's prescriptions piled up on a pharmacy counter. How much? I asked. There was a pause. Almost 9,000. Numbers have weight. He felt it when he said it out loud. That's not my responsibility, I said. You could have warned me, he snapped. You didn't warn Mom, I replied. That ended the call. The next move wasn't mine. It came through certified mail. A notice from the insurance provider addressed jointly to my parents. Subject: Coverage Review and Adjustment. It outlined the discrepancy, the effective dates, the required reimbursement. It also reinstated my mother's dependent coverage retroactively, something I'd been told was unlikely. Documentation matters. 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. This one from a family court clerk. Filing acknowledgement. Case number assigned. Legal separation initiated. By him. The filing date was backdated to October. September lease. October, money transfers. November, insurance removal. February, legal cover. It was all there. He called again that night. This time, his voice wasn't controlled. I never thought you'd do this to me, he said. That sentence almost made me laugh. Almost. You mean tell the truth? I asked. He accused me of manipulation. Of turning my mother against him. Of poisoning the narrative. He said he'd been under stress. That he'd been scared. I couldn't watch her decline, he said. I watched her decline, I replied. Every day. Silence. Then he tried something else. I'm still your father. That was the line he thought would work. I needed a father when I was 21, I said. You were busy starting over. He hung up. The irreversible action came the following week. The house. The mortgage. The question everyone avoids. I filed the hardship application using my mother's medical documentation and the timeline of abandonment. I attached everything. Dates. Statements. Proof of separate residence. Insurance gaps. Financial withdrawals. The review took 6 days. On day 7, we received approval for temporary relief. Reduced payments. No penalties. No foreclosure proceedings. Protection. That same afternoon, my father texted me again. They're garnishing my bonus. I didn't respond. The final call came a month later. Different number. Same area code. I'm sick, he said. It's serious. I let him speak. I didn't interrupt. I need help, he said again. I don't have anyone. I looked at my calendar. My mom's next infusion appointment was highlighted in red. I thought about the years she'd swallowed fear quietly so other people wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I'm sorry, I said calmly. You should contact your insurance provider. You can't do this, he whispered. I said nothing. Then I ended the call. That wasn't revenge. That was boundaries enforced by reality. After that last call, things didn't explode. They thinned out. Conversations ended. Messages stopped coming. People drifted into the spaces they'd already chosen. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the heavy kind. The kind that settles once decisions have finished arguing with you. My phone stopped lighting up with unknown numbers. No more late-night voicemails that started with breathing before words. No more indirect questions sent through relatives who suddenly remembered I existed. Some people stayed. That mattered. My mom's sister started driving in once a week. No excuses, no commentary. She brought groceries and left receipts on the counter without asking for reimbursement. One neighbor learned my mom's appointment schedule and quietly adjusted her dog walking routine so she could check in afterward. These weren't grand gestures. They were consistent ones. My father's side went silent. There were no apologies. No explanations. Just absence. I learned quickly who had known more than they admitted. Who had heard his version early and accepted it because it required less effort. He was overwhelmed. One cousin said in a message I didn't reply to. You should be grateful he stayed as long as he did, said another. Grateful. That word followed me for months. I focused on what could be rebuilt. Not emotionally, practically. I adjusted work hours. I negotiated a partial remote schedule. I learned which pharmacies honored emergency overrides and which ones didn't. I set up automatic refills. I labeled folders. I planned 3 months ahead because surprise had become a luxury we couldn't afford. My mom changed too. Not in the way people expect. She didn't harden. She simplified. One afternoon, while sorting old files, she handed me her wedding ring. No ceremony. No speech. I don't need this anymore, she said. I asked if she was sure. She nodded. I know what commitment looks like now. We sold it quietly. No announcement. The money covered 6 weeks of treatment costs and one unexpected repair to the furnace that winter. Useful. Clean. That was the tone of our life afterward. Functional. Honest. Months passed. Then a year. My father never contested anything. He never corrected the record. He never tried again. I heard updates indirectly. That his illness had progressed. That he'd moved again. That he'd downsized further. Each piece of information arrived stripped of urgency, like news from a distant city he once lived in. I felt no relief in it. No satisfaction. Just confirmation. The house felt different without the constant tension of someone preparing to leave. Even on hard days, there was stability. Predictability. My mom started sleeping through the night again. She laughed occasionally, small, surprised laughs that seemed to catch her off guard. One evening, she looked at me across the kitchen table and said something I'll never forget. I'm not angry anymore, she said. I'm clear. I understood exactly what she meant. There was loss. Of course there was. A marriage. A future that had been assumed. A version of family that no longer applied. But there was also something gained. Not strength, clarity. The kind that doesn't need validation. People sometimes ask if I regret hanging up on him. They frame it as a moral question. I don't answer it that way. I think about timing. About choices made when power still existed. About who stayed when staying cost something. Some doors don't close dramatically. They simply stop opening. And once they do, you build your life on the side you're standing on, not the one that walked away. When I look back now, what stays with me isn't the shock of what my father did. It's how ordinary it all felt while it was happening. There was no villain speech. No dramatic exit. Just a series of choices made quietly, justified internally, and executed with enough calm to look reasonable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. That's what makes stories like this hard to tell. People expect anger. They expect shouting. They expect a moment where someone finally snaps. But real life doesn't always give you that release. Sometimes it gives you paperwork, timelines, forms that need signatures, calls that end without raised voices. I've learned that composure is often mistaken for cruelty. When you don't perform pain the way people expect, they assume you don't feel it. That's not true. It just means you learned early that emotion doesn't protect you. Preparation does. There are still days when I think about the version of my father I grew up with. The one who taught me how to drive. The one who packed my lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside. That man existed. I don't deny that. But he's not the man who mattered when it counted. Illness reveals things. Not just in bodies, in priorities. It narrows the world until there's no room left for pretending. When my mother got sick, she didn't become a burden. She became a mirror. And my father didn't like what he saw reflected back at him. I don't tell this story to be praised. I don't tell it to be excused. I tell it because there are people listening right now who are being slowly abandoned while being told to stay grateful. People who are carrying more than their share and being made to feel unreasonable for noticing. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't owe softness to people who chose strategy over responsibility. You don't owe access to people who opted out when things stopped being convenient. And you don't owe explanations to anyone who already had the facts and made their choice anyway. Boundaries don't require cruelty. They require clarity. Hanging up that phone wasn't a declaration. It was a conclusion. One reached long before the call ever came, supported by years of evidence, and finalized the moment I understood that love without accountability is just another form of abandonment. My life didn't get easier after that. It got quieter, more honest, more predictable in the ways that matter. And that's enough. If you're still listening, thank you for carrying this with me to the end. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. People show you who they are when staying costs them something. Believe that and build accordingly.